Today, we're going to share with you a specific story about a paranormal experience that a couple of people went through and that we heard about, an eyewitness account. So basically what happened is two people were walking up Horsenden Hill late at night. They'd been up to see the sunset and they'd spent some time there, and then they decided to come back down, but they missed the path.
Now, I understand that this couple sighted a being which to them didn't resemble anything that is either human or anything within the animal kingdom as we know it. The description was pretty fascinating, I found, because they alighted mostly on the fact that it was a grey but a short swart version with almost no neck. They couldn't make out any visible features, but it was greyish, it was slick, there was no clothes of any kind, and it was at a distance of maybe about 50 yards. Very visible, even though it was like in the dark. It was like they're caught in the moonlight or something like this.
It was quite a well moonlit night, but they'd realised they'd missed path, and what happened was there was a lot of snaggy undergrowth, and they were kind of trying to navigate that, and then one of them heard a rustling in the undergrowth behind them, looked around and sighted this entity, quite well lit. There wasn't any cloud. The guy reported that the stars were quite visible, there wasn't a lot of light pollution, and suddenly they saw this and were absolutely infused, as the man reports, with mindless terror, and they was running down the hill, felt that the undergrowth was snagging at them, the other person almost fell, and the feeling of stark malevolence that came from this creature, which was about 2 feet tall, was absolutely palpable.
Because I was wondering, like, if it was such a small creature, what would be so scary about it? But the impression I get is that it was so clearly something that was just not understandable from this world, or not something that anybody is familiar with. Certainly this couple had never seen anything like it pretty much anywhere. But when it emerged from the bushes, it seemed to kind of have some kind of curiosity about them. I think they both kind of like stopped and stared at each other, for the couple and this being, for a second, and then the couple just basically tried to kind of slowly move off without startling or enticing the creature in some kind of way. They couldn't really, I think, get a proper kind of look at its face, but it was quite clearly something that was, nothing that wasn't a person, it wasn't an adult, it wasn't a child, it wasn't kind of like some kind of mammal that you could be familiar with. It was just something that was like
Well, they reported it as being about 2 feet tall, and my understanding of it is those tiny creatures in one of the Mummy films, the guy seemed to think that was the closest thing, particularly visually, facially, that he could think that it resembled, but it was the fact that it came from nowhere and it started to pursue them as they were running. And
it was walking kind of in parallel with them, and then it started inching close, and that's when they ran, because they didn't want to hang around to actually get kind of any closer to it or have any closer encounter that they were already having.
The interesting thing, though, was this happened, I think, in the early 2000s, when mobile phone technology and video technology wasn't what it is now. So if they had thought to capture it, they wouldn't have got a good image. But the one thing that I found really telling was that the guy said even if it was now, even if it was when we discussed this 6 months ago, that they would not have even thought to get their phones out and video it. That the thing was that they just both felt they had to get away from it as soon as possible.
They had kind of crude camera phones, I think, at the time. That's what most people had at the time. But even if they used those, they wouldn't have really caught anything. If they had the most sophisticated phones now, and it happened in this day and age, they say they would have still been so shell-shocked at the sight of this thing that the last thing on their minds would be, we've got to capture this for posterity, for public interest or anything like that. That was the last thing on their minds. They just wanted to get out of Dodge, and that's when things started to get even weirder, wasn't it? As you said, the snarling kind of branches and kind of like the boughs from the trees, they were trying to make rush their way down the hill.
They were off the path, and that was the difficult thing, because it was really scrubby and undergrowthy. But I think the lasting thing, I mean, if you look at analogy, there are those, I think they're called gillies in Scotland, and those kind of fairy, Faerie like creatures, which are also said to be malevolent. But there was nothing about this creature that was, they could really
press them on what type of entity this really was. But from their description, the best thing I can kind of gather is that it was some kind of like a goblin-like creature, or some kind of I guess the legend or Celtic myth, they're not your kind of fairy tale types of fairy, but
they're not Tinkerbell.
They're kind of like, they're quite inhuman, no wings, nothing like that.
But there's also those entities that are supposed to inhabit the peat bogs in Ireland as well.
So this thing had it had no clothes, it had no kind of like, nothing to kind of indicate that it had any human-like quality. It was just kind of, but it seemed to be sentient because of the way it seemed to carefully keep pace with them,
and also inching, and also the way that it was able to project this overwhelming, and I keep using the word malevolence, there was a sense of palpable evil, and also the unreasoning, complete suspension of any logic, run.
This is one of the most interesting things to me, because you'd think that just about anybody confronted with such a thing, day or night, I mean, obviously this is in the middle of the night, and I guess that, there were no other people around, it didn't seem to occur to them to call out for help if they were so scared. But again, I think that it was because what I was gathering is that their instinct was flight. It wasn't fight or anything else. It wasn't to call for help. It was just flight.
But there was no one there. But the other interesting thing was there's a complete reluctance I mean, to talk about it. They didn't really, I mean, I know they told a couple of friends and they told us, but there's a reluctance to talk about it, and they didn't want to revisit it. They didn't want to disclose it to anyone. They didn't want to report it. There was a real reluctance to acknowledge it, and I think particularly on the part of one of them, the guy who was the raconteur, was that the less they think about it, the better. And he used the phrase, "I want to close the door in my mind," because I think there's a fear that if you open that door somehow, you're going to summon that back.
When we asked for a bit of information of would there be any kind of evidence, like forensic evidence for somebody to explore, even if not now, back then, do they think that they would have found footprints, kind of trampled undergrowth, anything, DNA evidence of any kind?
But they didn't go back. This was the thing. They didn't go back.
But I found it interesting that the guy said, "I don't think there'd be anything. I don't think that no matter how, even if it was right after the incident, that people went up there to say, oh, I want to get a look. I want to find this thing. I want to bring it in. Imagine how interested the rest of the world would be to find such a being if it really is something."
But was it a dimension? I mean, it seemed to me to be what's the word? Intra. I mean, was it a dimensional thingy where they glimpsed through into another world and that world collided with ours?
This is, I think, what they were.
Or is it, a denizen of the world that keeps itself hidden and just came out because they were on their own and it was completely deserted?
I get the impression they were kind of frustrated slightly that they couldn't prove it in any way, but at the same time, I think that they were kind of glad that nobody would likely disturb this thing or try and hunt it down. It wasn't harmful. It didn't try to, as far as they know, literally tried to hurt them or anything like that.
But there was a sense that if it could have caught up to them, that it would have hurt them. And the other thing that I found interesting was that they regained the kind of well-defined path. There was a style gate thing which they both got over, and at that point when they regained the path, they lost sight of it and also seemed to regain some semblance of themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's interesting that they did mention that there's like an obelisk, a trigonometry point, is that what it's called? Where a landmark where cartographers are able to pinpoint from the top of the hill, distances to other places.
I think that's visible. I remember when I had a look, I think that's visible on.
And I was just wondering because a kind of an obelisk type of shape on the top of a hill is like, I guess there's something a bit Lovecraftian about that, but they did seem to think that there was any kind of relevance about that. But to me, it is quite interesting. This is literally the crest of the hill. There's no other kind of interesting there's no landmark. There's no other thing around there from what we.
Well, I think maybe when restrictions are lifted, it might be worth a train journey or a drive up there. I mean, it would be half a day out of our
It's a lovely looking area, and from what I understand, there's kind of like there's no kind of history from that place other than that there used to be a Roman hill fort. I think that's literally how the hill was created. It was a hill fort. I think it was artificially created so that kind of Roman scouts could survey the area properly. I don't know if it was like a natural.
But I think it's been developed into kind of nature walk thing, and I think there's also the canal, isn't there, that walks where the canal boats are.
And what they call a Gruffalo trail as well. I think, which is like a cartoon character for kids to get.
I've never heard of that. What's that?
It's something where kids and I think like their parents, teachers, they can take them on a nature tour around the place, but it's kind of revolves around a story of, interestingly enough, a monster of kind of a cuddly monster who's like supposed to be like the lead character, taking them through this kind of nature trail.
There was nothing cuddly about this though. But interestingly enough, I have if I haven't seen anything on Reddit or the subreddit things that deal with these kind of paranormal things. It's literally just an anecdotal thing, which is why I think it was briefly worth sharing. But I do remember the absolute palpable terror of you could just feel it coming off them in waves, even though it was a long time after it happened.
I know we're getting to speculative territory here, but what do you think would have happened if they had held their ground and actually tried to not confront the creature, but literally tried to engage it in some kind of way? Because I get the impression they felt it really was malevolent. I mean, what's the worst that could have happened?
My sense of that is because I did rely on the fact that the guy said that the nearest thing he could think of was those mummy things, and the way they slice through that jungle and just seem to eat people up.
The mummy returns.
The mummy returns. And I think that's what might have happened is that it would have dragged one of them off into the undergrowth, or possibly, but I think they would have been seriously hurt.
I mean, I don't know whether this had any kind of.
Of course, it had faded. Like sometimes reports, it fades into nothing because it's. I think Stephen King calls it a thinny, where you see where the dimensions thin, and maybe that would have happened.
There's all that business about how seemingly almost alien the environment became once they'd lost their way, trying to make their way down the hill. A Disney type of nightmare forest or something.
Prohibition, and I know being half Celt that there is that thing. If you wander off the path, it's a big thing in Irish mythology, particularly. Is don't wander off the path because if you do, you can encounter these kind of creatures.
I mean, it could have been a bit of mania on their part, or maybe the creature itself had some kind of effect, or like a mesmeric effect.
I find interesting is both those people are skeptics. They don't like talking about it, but they're not the kind of people that would be fanciful or imagine something. It was literally forced on their notice, and they're both very grounded people, and I wouldn't call them particularly interested in paranormal things. They're very grounded in kind of reality, if you like. But I really do feel that they want to close the door on it, and I also had a sense, as I said before, that there's a fear that if you open the door and you think about it too much that you may invite it back in. And superstitious as that may be, if you've been that scared by something, I can understand that.
But we really would like to extend our thanks to them for sharing their story with us.
And just to say that we did promise that we would preserve their anonymity, but yes, we are very grateful to the fact that A, they shared it with us, and B, they said that we'd share this as our first story on our very fledgling new paranormal channel.
Yeah, and I would like to also thank everybody for joining us for this second episode of our paranormal narrative, because there is more in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in our philosophy. I believe that is something that Shakespeare was bang on with, and stories like this, whatever you make of it, they are very intriguing, certainly to us and hopefully to you. We will be getting into more cryptids and paranormal encounters very soon with you. Let us know if you've got any questions about this story.
And also, sorry, just to say, if you've got any experiences of your own that you'd like to share or that you'd like us to explore, we'd be really, really glad to hear from you. Do let us know in the comments, and we will be very happy to share that story with people.
Take care of yourselves. We'll catch you next time.
And thank you very much for listening. This is Caroline and Mike. Stay safe wherever you are.
Take care.